Well, here's a few news articles. This is the second article I've seen in the last few weeks of people stealing dogs. This seems to be a new crime trend in America. So they stole Lady Gaga's dog in Los Angeles. They stole somebody else's dog in San Francisco recently. She's offering $500,000 ransom for the dog. So I guess kidnapping dogs for ransom is now becoming a crime in America. I was very interested to see this because the dog gambling is huge. A ransom 15 pounds. Must be a lot bigger than that. 15K pounds. Yeah, that sounds more like it. Yeah, well, I guess it's a pretty good crime. I guess the dogs are probably not well guarded and pretty easy to grab. It reminds me, I think in Mexico, there's places where they kidnap people all the time and hold them for ransom. I know business people go down there, have to get special insurance for that. So anyway, I was surprised by this. If you have a serious psychiatric problem, a lot of people will just give you drugs, and then you keep taking the drugs for years or maybe forever, and they have side effects and they wear off and they're very annoying. So Norway is trying to develop drug-free programs to wean people off the drugs, and I think I regard this as a positive trend, although I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not qualified to have an expert opinion, but I like it. I like to think that if you're taking drugs, you shouldn't just keep taking them forever, but you should somehow find some way to live with less drugs because the drugs are bad for you. Anyway, the fusion reactions are coming. I've been hearing more and more about fusion, and apparently they're making the Joint European Torus has got a prototype scaled down version of a fusion reactor that they're going to be running soon, demonstrating that it creates more energy than it consumes. And I saw a startup a week or so ago in the news saying, I think in 10 years, they're going to have commercial fusion reactors. This is a fantastic, wonderful thing because it will produce a lot of energy and it will not produce any carbon and it'll produce no significant radioactive waste. So it would be a much cleaner way to make energy than fission nuclear reactors or burning coal or burning natural gas or any of the other techniques. It would be clean like, solar or wind. So a very good idea. And also using fuels that are easy to get. Nothing we're going to run out of. So the news is all over the place. Australia tried to say that Facebook would have to pay for all the news links that people put on Facebook. And Facebook retaliated by blocking all the news in Australia for a while. And now they've reached some sort of compromise, although the details aren't clear yet. I heard some people say this is wonderful and we should follow suit because it's going to fund our local newspapers. And I heard other people say it's going to do the opposite. It's just a way that for Rupert Murdoch to sweep up money from the internet. It's not actually going to reach any of the small newspapers that people would like to save. But anyway, they've reached a compromise of sorts, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about this as it goes along and other countries imitate it, and we'll see what comes of it all. Everybody has a pretty high appetite for regulating the internet giants lately. But the early attempts to do that seem to be pretty clumsy and ineffective. So Bitcoin now has an exchange-traded fund, and I don't understand why you would have a Bitcoin exchange-traded fund. Now, the point of a fund, I actually have some money in a mutual fund. The point of a mutual fund is they diversify across many stocks, and somebody else figures out how to do that, and they include things like bonds and such. If you're only investing in one asset, I don't understand what the use of the fund is. Anyway, they now have $500 million in assets, so people are exchanging. You pay a 1% fee for no apparent reason if they're just buying Bitcoin. Maybe they're doing something a little smarter than just putting it all in Bitcoin. But anyway, more and more serious financial instruments are appearing. Well, but what's the advantage of specializing in Bitcoin? I mean, there's no strategy, I think, except I guess you can choose when to buy and sell. That might be the point. Anyway, there is an exchange-traded fund. They tried to do this about 3 years ago, and they couldn't get on the stock market because Bitcoin was considered too disreputable and unreliable. And with Tesla jumping in, Bitcoin in the last month seems to have made big steps forward towards being really accepted and treated as a serious financial instrument. So for better or worse, it looks like we're going there. I highly disapprove of Bitcoin. I stay out of it. I don't recommend it at all because it's not based on anything. That bothers me. Doesn't seem to bother very many people, but a currency that's not based on any product being produced or any government supporting it, it troubles me. It's all foam and no beer as far as I can tell. But anyway, so here's a crypto exchange that had some kind of defect on their servers, so they sold the Bitcoin at 10% of the price, and now they're asking people to give it back. This reminds me of my first job at my escrow agency. One of the first jobs they gave me was, we paid these 6 people too much money, so write a letter and send it to them asking them to give back the money. And some of them did. And of course, as these people went to lawyers and said, you're not required to give back the money. When somebody sells you for the price they advertised and they made a mistake, that's their problem. You probably can just keep it, but they're trying to talk people into bringing it back. And I guess they'll be going to court and fighting about it. Anyway, so we're here. This is 129S, and today it's about authentication. So here we are. I'll talk about authentication, and then I'll talk about command injection here. So you should be doing the Web Security Academy projects, and you should do at least 2 of them a week from now on. They're 10 points each, and there's just a series of places in Canvas for you to turn it in every week, just so we can see that you're making progress. And I highly encourage you to do more and get extra credit. There's tons of great projects there, and the more you do them, the better. All right, so let's take a look at the slides, which I probably have to open again because of my workflow. I keep updating them, and then after I update them, I have to close them to load them up to my server. All right, so there we are. Only updated a couple of words on one slide, but it's technically an update. All right, so if you're going to authenticate people, you have to, as we've talked about a lot, you have to have a authentication and authorization system where you know who people are, and you decide whether they're allowed to do things. Are they allowed to change a password? Are they allowed to go into somebody's account and so on? So you have to find out who people are. They claim to be somebody, that's identification, and they have to somehow prove it. Now, the cheapest and easiest and least secure method is just using a name and a password. So that's what most people do. There are other techniques like multi-factor authentication, where you have the password and something else like your IP address or a phone app with a number on it or something, and that's much more secure. There are also things where you have cryptographic certificates, as like smart cards or something. And there are some other techniques like built into Windows and Digest. And a very popular one for websites is authentication services, where you let somebody else handle it, typically Facebook or Google. That's a pretty good idea for smaller companies that would rather not bother maintaining a database and a bunch of servers. You just let Google keep track of the passwords. It's better for the customers too. They don't need to make a new account. They just use their Google account. So 2-factor authentication, where you have some second factor like these RSA secure IDs or these other things that you carry around. And then you put in this in addition to a password or a PIN. The SSL certificate is a cryptographic object that you carry around on a token or something, and that identifies you as the bearer of that, and hopefully it's combined with something like a PIN or a password to make sure it's you and not somebody that stole your little object. And these basic authentication is a very old system that sends your password and username encoded as base 64 along with the web request. And Digest sends it as an MD5 hash and something like that. And Windows Integrated sends it as a Windows hash and LM hash, I think. All these are things that are used to sort of automatically log in, the last 2 especially. And they're mainly on intranets, Windows domains. And then, like I say, third-party authentication. Microsoft has something called Microsoft Passport, where you'll let Microsoft do to log in. Barack Obama wanted the U.S. government to handle authentication, so they would handle you just have login there, and then the government would log you in elsewhere. This is like several of Obama's plans. This was a terrible idea. Everyone freaked out and they tried to pretend he never said it the next day. But what really happened is everybody pretty much settled on using Facebook or LinkedIn or Google as your authentication provider. They're by far the most common. Most web apps or most Android apps I audit, they have an option to log in with Facebook or something. That would seem to, if I was making a company, I'd probably do that. Say, have your customers log in with Facebook or Google. 99% of your customers have one or the other of those, and there's no need for them to have another account. So when you log in with Facebook, you'll see your app. It says log in with Facebook. So your password goes to Facebook, not to the company you're logging into, and they then send back a OAuth token, which you send, and then the company can take the OAuth token and it can send a request to Facebook and find out a little bit about you, like just your name and your email address or something, and they don't have to ever handle a password. Don't we have to just rely on government's FIPS structure for crypto? Well, FIPS is not a bunch of government servers run by the government. It's just a compliance standard. So all FIPS does is say you have to meet these standards in order to transact business within the government. So you aren't using the government servers. You're just meeting their standards. That's just a written document that says you must have this level of encryption and, these management structures and such. FIPS authentication. That's my understanding of it. FIPS is just a compliance standard like PCI DSS. So, and this is, of course, a huge issue in America. In America, there is a big issue that you should not have to have an internal passport. You don't need to carry around papers to go through your daily life in America. You don't need to carry identification if you're not driving a car. This was a big thing. The ACLU is big on this. The head of the ACLU will go out jogging, and if a policeman stops him, he will say, I'm not telling you who I am, and I'm not showing you any ID, and I don't have to, not unless you're arresting me for a crime. It's a big issue in America. You're allowed to cross state lines without permission. And people, they made a big deal of it when I was a kid. They want to make sure we're not like Russia or Nazi Germany, where you have to have papers and you can be locked up for not having your papers. So there's a real reluctance in America to let the government be involved in business you do when they don't have to be. Anyway. So when you use these passwords, people often choose bad passwords. If you let people pick passwords, a bunch of them will choose like the top 10 bad passwords, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And all right. And they'll just set password equal to the username, use the same password at every site, and do other foolish things. So when you try to see how good the passwords are, you can read a website to see what the rules are. See if you can register an account and just try registering accounts at weak passwords, see what you can get away with, and try to change your password. These are ways to see how good passwords are. A large number of sites now will do something to limit you from using bad passwords, like make them at least 8 characters long, and they have to have a special character and a capital letter and things like that. And what you're worried about here is people will just try brute force attack, where they have a list of passwords. Like the most common thing you do is you get a list of stolen passwords. There are downloads from the RockU list and others of billions of real passwords people have used, and you just try all these passwords, hundreds and thousands of login attacks. So the simplest defense is to just lock anybody out after they fail to log in something like 5 times in half an hour or 10 times. Then you lock them out. And don't let them log in for some period of time or until they call your help desk or something. And then nobody can really try more than a few common passwords before they get locked out. And that stops people from doing these brute force attacks. You can do them in burp. You can have a whole list of words, and it will just try all the words. And then you see, the simplest thing you typically do in burp, the easiest thing is just look at the length of the response. So all these responses that are 1610 are probably saying wrong password, and one of them is different. That's probably the right password. So you see it here. Password 2 has a different length, so that's why it rises to the top. And then you can examine them in detail to see if that's true, but typically that's true. And so I have some pages where you can practice it, and in the pen testing classes here, people try these. Hydra is the main tool people use for that kind of attack. Hydra is a very fast hacking tool that will open multiple threads and send many thousands of attacks, a lot of attacks per second, depending on your network and such. So you can really try a large number of guesses as long as there is no CAPTCHA and no lockout. Anyway, so you can have, when you have a password attempt counter, you might implement it badly. And here's an example of that. I've got burp here, and I've got an example in my burp browser, and that would be this one. All right. So here's an insecure lockout. Let me make this bigger. All right. So I've got Dumbo, and I have other people like Sneezy and Grumpy. So if I go to Sneezy and I try to log in. Then it asks me for a password, and then it tells me your invalid password. So I don't know what the right password is for Sneezy. But Dumbo used a password equal to the username, so the administrator locked him out. So if I go to Dumbo and submit, and I put in the password of Dumbo and submit, then it tells me you're locked out. Not that it was the wrong password, but you have been locked out for some kind of offense. In this case, having a password that's equal to username, but it could be that you tried too many times. And of course, this is easy enough to overcome with Burp. Here's the request that's sent. Let me make sure it's showing. Make this right there. That should do it. So here's the request that sent Dumbo and Dumbo to the server. And here's the response that says you're locked out. So I'm going to send this to the repeater. And in the repeater, I can see that the request well, I was expecting to see here we are. Here's the request. The request has a cookie, and first, by the way, I should check for CSRF protection, replay protection. If I send this from the repeater, I still get a response that says user locked out. So they don't have any way to tell that I'm repeating an identical request, which is important. Otherwise, I'd have to use something more clever than this. I would have to use intercept to do this. But now I can see there's a cookie. This is just a Cloudflare cookie. It doesn't matter. But here's a cookie that says lockout equals 1. So what if I just change that to 0 and send that? Now I'm logged in. So there was a lockout threshold, but it's kept on the client. This, by the way, is true of most paywalls. If you read the New York Times and you read more than like 10 articles a month, it will say, you've read all your articles, you can't see any more. And as a lot of people know, you can just go to private mode in your browser where it throws away the cookies and it won't remember that count. That count is kept on your machine in the cookies. You could also just delete the cookies and get another 10 articles, or use a different browser like Firefox instead of Internet Explorer and get another 10. That's because it's not a security boundary they really care about. It's just there to sort of remind you that you ought to pay. It's not there to like seriously lock you out. If they really wanted to seriously lock you out, they would have to make you log in and then keep some kind of record on the server of how many times you have been there. All right. So anyway, that's a poor lockout counter. All right. Another thing you have often is you try to log in, and if the password is incorrect, you get one message. But if the username is incorrect, you get a different message. This is a very significant weakness. This means I could just try usernames on a big list until I find a good username, and then separately try passwords on a big list now that I know the username. So statistically, it's going to take the square root of as many guesses to get in. If I had to guess them both at once, it would be a much more difficult problem. So this is considered a risky practice, although it's very common. And one of the famous cases was AT&T. This happened about 10 years ago. AT&T, you could guess the email address and it would tell you this person doesn't have an account. And so if you could get a list of email addresses, try them, find out which email addresses are authentic, and then from the response he was able to find the IME number for people's cell phones. So from the AT&T website, this was Weave, was a famous internet troll. He was a friend of his. They wrote a script, and the script would send this stuff up to them, and then it would get the SID. It would get some phone ID, which was used for authentication. And at this time, that phone ID was used by most iPhone apps as enough information to authenticate you so he could get into people's Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and other things just with that number. So it was a very severe issue. He conspired with other people to try to embarrass AT&T by releasing all this data and went to court and eventually got off. My lawyer, in fact, was on that case and managed to get him. He managed to not have jail time because he was successfully defended in court. But this was that was a user enumeration attack that also revealed other information. So you shouldn't let people do that. There shouldn't be any place on your website where I can send a username and it'll tell me if it's valid without me also sending in a valid password. All right. So here, for example, Burp has the ability, if you send in something, even if it doesn't explicitly tell you the username was wrong or the password was wrong, it might send you slightly different error messages. Like here, it says something about unsuccessful logins. This one has a non-breaking space. This one doesn't have the non-breaking space. So just on the server, they went to 2 pages and they're not quite the same. So any such difference can be exploited. All right. And so I did this with my Hackazon server, and I went to compare, but there were no significant differences. But here's the steps if you want to do it. There's a comparer in Burp in the history. I don't think I'll make it a live demo here because we got other things to do. But I found no significant differences, no useful differences. Anyway, let's take a look at some Cahoots, which will be up here. Good. All right. 6A. All right. That's getting there. All right. Let me get to my volume. All right. Go. All right. Looks like that's it. Okay, what's the most common form? Okay, name and password, cheapest and most common. All right, what did Obama propose? Yep, he planned to make a U.S. government authentication service. All right, what defense most effectively lowers the brute force attack risk? Okay, that's what lockout counters do. All right. What side channel may allow user enumeration, even when the error pages are identical? There will be timing. If the pages are identical, there'll be nothing you can do in the comparer, but it still might take a different amount of time if you have the wrong username than it does when you have the wrong password. All right. All right, GG, that might be real initials. And Clickers is certainly not. And Kunal is a real name. So Kunal is getting his points. The rest of you, not unless you come out of the closet. All right. So, by the way, Phil's let me, we'll come to this, Phil's let me make 2 accounts with the same username, but they were separate accounts. So I deduced that there must be some hidden identity number that I couldn't see. Yes, because of this chapter in the textbook, I thought I'd really found something when I found that at Phil's. GG told me who he is. Good. Good. All right. Yeah, the spammers are really trying to call me today. My phone is ringing as I ignore it here. It's good to have that option. Anyway. Clickers sent me a message. Well, I wonder how they sent the message. Maybe a private message up here? Canvas inbox. Oh, okay. That's the thing. I have too many boxes. All right, I'll make a note. Clickers check Canvas inbox. Yeah, this is the thing. My phone is ringing. I got Twitter. I got Canvas. You can easily get nuts this way. I mean, a lot of people send me messages, and 6 months later, people send me SMS messages, and man, 6 months later, I'll see a pile of them sitting in there. There are too many communication channels, and I often don't use the whatever one other people expect me to use. Anyway, so all right. So if you are sending your credentials over the internet, then various people get a chance to see that. Anybody within range of your wireless card will get it if you're using wireless. Anybody that can get access to the routers that your stuff passes through from your company or the ISP or at the other end, if you send anything off to the internet, it passes through a lot of computers and devices, and any of those people can read it. So that's why you should be using HTTPS instead of HTTP. HTTP doesn't encrypt anything, and all those people can read the contents. HTTPS encrypts everything with a public-private key system so that nobody can read it except the real server you're trying to send it to, unless people do man-in-the-middle attack on HTTPS, and that is quite difficult to do. So this protects you. The contents of your traffic cannot be opened by unauthorized people. But the problem is there are quite a few attacks that will still work. For example, if you send credentials in the query string, it might appear in logs of servers or at the other end or in the browser history at your end, things like that. So that's one possibility. And also we'll talk about other, this stops an eavesdropper between you and the end, but it's still possible for the data to be mishandled at your end or at the other end. And a lot of attacks do attack it at one of the endpoints. So if you store your credentials in cookies, they can be reused. So even if I steal the encrypted data, I could resend that encrypted data later in principle, although modern versions of HTTPS will not allow that kind of replay because they use a different key for every session. All right, and this was very popular for banks until about 8 years ago. The main page would be HTTP, and the login button would be HTTPS. And this is a really bad idea because it means I could replace the entire page with a fake page with a different button, and you wouldn't be able to see any difference. So this is not that common anymore. The only reason they did it years ago is for some reason they believed that there were a lot of people with browsers that could not use HTTPS. I don't know what they thought their customers were using, but they thought that people couldn't use HTTPS and the main page had to be HTTP for that reason. I think that's pretty much over now. And here's one of the many endpoint attacks, and I should have this ready to go in my Burp browser. So if I go here, this is a cross-site scripting demo. So here I've got, this one here is got an on-click. It executes this JavaScript to just pop up a box. And there it is. Hi, this is an XSS vulnerability. So that demonstrates that I can run JavaScript when I click it. This one will show my cookie. This is the cookie we set before, the previous one that said lockout equals 1. And this one will open a pop-out window with an image in it. So there's an image that pops up, and that could have been anything. It could be another web page with malware in it that you can bring. And here's the one that sends the cookie to a remote log. And there it is, lockout equals 1. It sends it to some third-party log. So the point is, this will work even over HTTPS because it does not rely on sniffing traffic in the middle and decrypting it. It tricks your browser into sending the secret to a third party. So these are many attacks that HTTPS cannot stop. The only thing HTTPS stops is interception in the middle, eavesdropping, which is a good thing to stop. But some people think HTTPS means you're secure, and it doesn't mean anything that blanket at all. It just stops certain attacks, and that's true of all security measures. There's no such thing as perfect security. You have to be more careful. There are countermeasures that stop certain attacks, but there are always other attacks that you haven't stopped. Anyway, so some people like to make you change your password. This was an official government recommendation for years, which they finally withdrew about a year ago. This turns out to be a really stupid idea. All this does is irritate people. It's not clear how they thought this was going to help. Anyway, the only time you really need to change your password is when you get one of those warnings saying your password is compromised, or you see that somebody saw it or something. Other than that, changing it frequently just seems to make things worse. What you really ought to do is use a password manager, and you really ought to let your password manager generate a random password for every site. So they're all long and complicated. I highly recommend that. Just get used to using a password manager. At first it seems strange, and it's much easier once you get used to it. I'm using LastPass. Some people are mad at it, but I was not using that feature where you synchronize with different devices anyway. But there are other password managers out there. And besides, the simplest thing would be to just pay LastPass. That's what I'd do if I wanted it. But anyway, even if you use the iCloud keychain or the one in your browser, that would be a whole lot better than reusing simple passwords all over the place, which is what most people do. You should be using some kind of password manager so you have a different password at every site. That's probably the most important thing you can do to secure an average user. People often say, what should I do? And I say, get a password manager is probably the best thing you can do, the single thing you can do. Anyway, updating your system would be good too. Anyway, so when you change your password, it will typically ask you for the old password and then what you want the new password to be. But a lot of them, if you put the wrong thing in for the old password, it will not ever look at the new password at all. And so I can test passwords here, and it will never get to the part where it tries to change anything, so I will not hit any lockout threshold. So I can try passwords in the reset password really fast over and over again, and without facing a CAPTCHA or some kind of lockout threshold. So this is, the kind of thing you do. You look for some part of the website that lets you do that. I've seen ones where the password reset field lets me test usernames too, without recording it, without locking me out. All right, so here's what you ought to do. Identify the user, validate the existing password, check to see if it's time to lock them out, then compare the new password, and then feed back the error condition after that's all over. So I should have to fill the form all the way out, and trying to reset the password 10 times should lock you out, just like logging in with the wrong password 10 times locks you out. But very many people fail to fix this, fail to make it so good. So it's often a weakest link. When you have a forgotten password, you can typically get back in with a technique called identity proofing that asks you some other thing to prove who you are, like the last 4 of your social security number or your mother's maiden name, and often that's pretty easy information to get. So this is often how you get into accounts. That's how Sarah Palin's account got hacked a few years ago. The reset question was, in what town did you meet your husband? And that was something they could easily look up, what town she went to high school in, and then you could get in her account. But that was because she was using a Yahoo account for government business, which is another poor practice. You should really use your official government account for that for a lot of reasons, including records retention requirements. Anyway, sometimes they let users write their own questions, and then they might ask stupid questions like yes or no questions, or questions with obvious answers, and that's not so good. Even if you force them to use sometimes the apps disclose the forgotten password. So in that case, I can get your old password and log in with your old password, and you will never know this has happened. See, if I forced a password reset, then you would notice, hey, I'm locked out. But if I can recover your old password, then I can use your account and you'll never know. And that's usually what a stolen cookie lets you do too. Sometimes you can change the email address where the password reset link goes, and that's just asking for it because I can change it to one under my control. Using just the last 4 of an SSN, that's pretty risky too, because that's also information that's not that hard to find. The strong mechanism, we not disclose the question, just ask the answer. Well, I don't know about that. But by the way, one thing a lot of people say is they just lie to all the answers. They don't use their real mother's maiden name. They have a series of lies which they store in their password manager. That's a pretty good policy. Have lies you use to answer those proving questions, because anybody looking it up would not be able to find out your false answer. Yeah. Anyway. And by the way, if you do perform a password reset, you should inform the user by email, somebody just reset your password, so you know. If you didn't do that, somebody else did it. All right. So Remember Me is where you stay logged in, which is essentially all mobile apps work. You stay logged in for a long time. So it typically just stores some persistent cookie, like the username to remember and some kind of session number. But if the session number is short like this, that's terrible, because I can just guess other session numbers until I get into somebody else's account. So it's typically a lot longer. All right. And so one thing I could do is steal this, like I was showing you with cross-site scripting. I can get you to click on a link. Your browser will send this cookie to somebody, and then I have your cookie, and I can get in your account. There are other attacks. All right. Like the one I was saying, if it's a short number like that, I can just try all numbers until I find a valid cookie. Now, it is fairly common that you call the help desk and say, I forgot my password or I'm locked out, and they're supposed to be able to do something about it. Sometimes they have a special user account to get in with a hidden function. And then they might have some way you can guess this, like a fixed backdoor password. This just came out again last week, another product made with a fixed backdoor password. Cisco did it like 8 times in the last 2 years. It is extremely common that people sell you software or devices with a secret, hidden, unchangeable backdoor account. It's a very common technique, and of course a very bad one, because sooner or later people will notice it and figure it out, and then you can get in everybody's device. Especially common with Internet of Things devices. But this is something amazing. I remember when I used to use Windows 98, you could just close the login screen and use it without logging in. And even if you did log in, you only had to get, I think, the first 6 characters of the password right. After that, you could put anything and it would just ignore it. Microsoft has done this before, and they're still doing it apparently with Hotmail. 16 characters, and if you type more, it just throws the others away. A lot of people, Microsoft also originally didn't care whether you type passwords in uppercase or lowercase. Some people forbid special characters in the passwords. It's just amazing how unwise they are. I mean, you ought to let people have long passwords. You ought to let them have special characters in the password. It's much more secure. And I mentioned this is the one someone was asking, because I did do it at Phil's. You might be able to make 2 accounts with the same name, and that could be a problem. But when I found a system that did that, a system at Phil's which is based on Oracle, I was able to make an account with the name and then another account with the same name. They both had the same email address. So password resets would be readable from either account, but I tried even resetting them the same password and different password, and they never got confused with each other. So I deduced that there is some kind of unique number on each account which I can never see inside the system. And then it's fine. It can somehow tell who I am when I log in. I think when I change them both to the same password, though, then I log into one of them. There's no way to get back into the other one. So there are a few weird defects, but there's nothing that really mattered, like somehow being able to get into the administrator's account by making an account named administrator. An example of a password recovery linked attack. Oh yes, this one here, I remember this, Matt Honan, yeah. This also happened at the same time to the head of Cloudflare. Yeah, that's a good one. So they were able to get into it. There were a couple people that had two-factor Gmail, and people were still able to get in because they were able to pass the proofing process and reset the password. So two-factor authentication is also not a perfect defense, because you can call the help desk and say, I lost my password, you have to let me in, and then you just have to talk them into it. And at this time, which I think was 4 or 5 years ago, there was a pretty well-known trick among, this 2012, a pretty well-known trick among black hats, where you could call like PG&E or something, and they would give you the last 4 of the SSN. You could call somebody else and they'd give you like the birthday, and you could call somebody else and they'd give you something. So you could take these different help desks and combine the information from them to get enough to get in. Yeah, and he's talking about the problem with the last 4 digits of the SSN. The problem is it's fairly common that you can find that out somewhere else. Another technique I've heard social engineers say is to call the help desk and just be relentlessly stupid. Say, I spelled it wrong, I can't type, oh, my keyboard doesn't work, my internet connection is no good, and frustrate them until they just let you in. That's another social engineering trick. Anyway, all right, good. So you can have you can automatically generate names like this if you want to, or you can base them on people's names and such, and then people can predict. Oh, hacking is not all that technical at all. No, in fact, this is an issue. This is something I heard said recently. I thought was very wise. Security is a human problem with a small technical component. I mean, real security is about all the stupid things people do, just like medicine. You know, medicine is mostly stop drinking, don't drive your car too fast, stop smoking, get some exercise. You know, it's not rocket science. It's don't do stupid things and do the right things instead. That's mostly what security is. And the technical is really just a small part of it. So technical people should not be disparaging management and people that write help desk manuals and graphic designers and marketing and advertising people. You need all that stuff. All those human, soft kill social things are a big part of success. And you have to cooperate with those people and respect them. You can't pick on them for not knowing a binary the way you do. They have a different skill that you need to make your company succeed. Anyway, and this happened to a lot of colleges I worked at. They would just, every student, remember for a while, every student's login was all change me. So you could just go to anybody's account they hadn't used yet and get in their account. Then for a while, every student's initial password was just their birthday as a 6-digit number. So it was pretty easy to guess that. You know, it's just, they do this a lot, foolish things. And then they distribute passwords by sending them through email or something. And if users don't have to change the password, they will often just leave it at the default forever. So, you know, there are a lot of these mistakes people make. Password resets, and new account passwords and password resets when they're forgotten are often very vulnerable. All right, let's try another Kahoot. 6B, we're done with 6A, and here's 6B. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. I guess that's it. what does HTTPS prevent? That's what it stops eavesdropping, doesn't stop these other attacks. But it does mean that people that pick up your traffic as it passes by will not be able to read it because it's encrypted. All right, what do you typically implement with a simple persistent cookie? Okay, that's what Remember Me is. That's typically how you're remembered on your cell phone and everything else. Although, as I mentioned, about half the Android apps I audit remember you by storing your password on the phone, which is a pretty miserable practice. A persistent cookie of just a random session ID would be a much better thing. All right. All right. What item is often insecure because it doesn't validate the fields in the correct order? Now, the password change, this isn't the perfect description of it, but the password change might just look at the first field and then stop there if that's wrong, and that would make it possible for you to do a brute force attack. All right. And what functionality might use a backdoor password for all accounts? That's it. User impersonation, where a help desk person can get into your account. An unwise practice. All right, clickers. There's two, and I know who that is. Oh, no, supposedly it's in the inbox. I know who GG is. All right, good. All right, I'm going to stop this one.